Hi guys, in today's video we'll be looking at a new type of object called Boolean. Boolean is essentially a true or false value. We'll also be looking at how you can use Booleans to control the flow of your application. So let's jump into Visual Studio and take a look. So the first thing we want to do is launch Visual Studio. Create a new project. Console app, .NET Framework, C#. I promise we'll move on to a different project type soon. Click Next. We'll call this one Bools. So Bool is short for Boolean. They both mean the same thing. So we are going to flesh out a very basic program with an extra function. So I'm going to add a console.readline to stop the application closing. We're going to create a new function, static void. We're going to call this one setup system. Doesn't take any parameters. And we're actually going to do something called declaring a class variable or an instance variable. So whereas previously we've declared a variable either inside of one of our own functions or inside of the main function, we're actually going to come out into the program level scope and we're going to create a bool. I'm going to call this one has finished setup, and we're going to say that's equal to false. So because our program starts, and when our program starts we haven't finished setting it up, we're going to say that's equal to false. And we're now going to call this setup system from our main function. So we're going to say setup system, and in our setup system we're going to check the value of this. So let's just quickly cover what a bool is. A bool is essentially a 1 or a 0. So low down in your computer's memory, bools are very easy to read because they're just a single 1 or a single 0. It's an on-off. So you can think of bool as being on-off, true or false, 1 or 0. It's all essentially the same thing. And what they allow you to do is, well, you've already been using them. So when we did conditional logic and we said if, this is equal to that, that is kind of a program, a function that returns a Boolean. So the result of this is either true or false. Just like our bool up here is false, this would also be false. The result of it would be false. So try and think of conditional logic as always kind of operating on these Boolean type parameters. We're just calculating those parameters on the fly. Where, x is equal to y. Well, that's either true or it's false. So it returns a true or a false, just like we did in our while loop. We say while true. We hover over that. You can see actually that's a Boolean. The true, just the word true, is actually a shorthand for a Boolean. So you've already really been working with Booleans, but I just haven't really shown you what they are or when you might want to use them specifically for something else. So we've got our main function, we've got our setup system function, we've got our variable up here. And what you'll have noticed as well when I declared this variable is I didn't say var. And the reason for that is var only works inside of a function, really. When you come out of a function and you're in a class, well, actually, you need to then start being quite specific with what your variable types are, because var just means variable. It can be anything, and the Visual Studio kind of figures out what you mean by what you assign to it. So when you're in a class, though, it just doesn't do that. So what we have to do is we have to say bool. But you can also say Boolean as well if you want. Bool is shorter, so I always use bool, and it's kind of blue. I don't know. It kind of matches the string and int and what have you. So, but bool, Boolean, same thing. So we've got our bool. We've declared it in our class. What we also need to do is we need to make this static because our function is static, and when your function is a static, it can only reference other static stuff. That's like a really, really dumbed down explanation of what's going on there, and we'll cover that in a later video. But for now, if you're in a static function and you're trying to access a variable outside of that function, that also needs to be static. So what we need to do is check and do some work with this variable when our program launches and maybe finish setting it up. So we could say in the setup system function, we could say if has finished setup equals false, so that indicates that it hasn't finished setting up. Then we in here would do some setting up. Our program isn't actually going to do anything, so all our setup will do is output a line to the console, and we'll say setup has finished. And then what we need to do is actually tell this variable to be true. So we have finished setting up now because we've put our line in the console. We say has finished setting up is true. And now the next time this setup system runs, if it gets ran by accident somewhere else, we won't set up the system again because this will actually equal true. So this block will be skipped. So it's just like conditional logic like we looked at before, but we're just using this bool variable as a sort of flag to stop certain bits of code running and kind of remembering that they have run as well. And what we could do is actually run that function twice. And if we add an else onto our setup system function and we put in here setup has already been ran, we will not rerun setup. So that's just basically telling the user that actually setup's been called a second time and we won't be running the main bit of setup because that flag has already been switched. So let's just have a look at that. Well, actually, yep, let's run that. So you see we got the setup is finished because the first time that our setup system was ran, the has finished setup was equal to false. So it did as it was supposed to do. It finished setting up and it signed that has finished setting up value to true. And then we ran it again just for the sake of it. And it detected that actually the system has already finished setting up. So we won't be setting it up again. This is a very common scenario for a bool variable, is to kind of keep track of whether something has happened or whether something needs to happen again. And you can set that to true or false, and different bits of conditional logic can pick up on that. So I hope that makes a bit of sense. Booleans are fairly straightforward, and as I say, you've already been using them. Hi guys, well done for making it to the end of the video. Just a quick heads up that there is a link to the project files from today's session in the video description. If you have any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to leave me a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next one.